Hey there, how's it going? I hope your day is going amazingly well. Thank you for giving me a little bit of your time. I really wanted to come on here and share 5 things that I've learned from Pan That Palette. This video idea has been kind of a mulling over process for the last couple of days because I've had a lot of questions about what I'm going to pan in the future for next year, as well as kind of my thought process as I'm going through Pan That Palette. And also August and September for me, I've noticed are the hardest kind of times of the year to be panning in general, but panning a palette especially, because when you're dedicating yourself to doing something for a year, August and September, you're past the halfway point, but you still got a long enough stretch of time in front of you that it can seem like, is it ever going to end? You know what I mean? So I hope that you find the tips in this video very helpful. Like I said, this has been kind of a culmination of things that I've learned over the span of panning. I'm on my 6th or 7th palette now, about to be finished, and so perhaps you will find this helpful as a way to keep you motivated to shop your stash, maybe to get in the panning groove, or just to find some motivation and inspiration to keep going if right now it's a little bit tough. So tip number 1, if you are new to Pan That Palette, or this is your first palette, the number 1 tip that I have learned through my years of panning the Naked palette, Lorac Pro, Stila palettes, the Too Faced Chocolate Bar, to now the Kat Von D Mi Vida Loca Remix palette, and I can honestly add my Lorac Mega Pro and my Lorac Pro 2 to that mix, consistency is key. Even if you don't want to work out of the palette every single day, the more consistent that you are, even if you only use 1 shade, that very steady progress will keep you motivated. And it's like once you hit pan in a shade, it's just enough of a motivator that I know for me, that keeps me motivated to be like, okay, let's go for it, let's finish it, move it out of my collection. I know that I can always find an alternative. So consistency, consistency, consistency. I have gotten to the point that over the years, I'm not afraid to incorporate other palettes into my looks. Like the look I'm wearing today, I'm wearing the Kat Von D Mi Vida Loca Remix palette along with my Naked 3 palette. I've got some shades from my Lorac Pro 2, and then I think that's, and then some Z palette shades. So you can always jump around your collection so you don't feel like you're neglecting the rest of your makeup, but definitely you want to make sure that you are at least using a shade every time that you do your makeup. As you get into doing your makeup, one of the things that I've noticed is, especially with neutral palettes, it is quite easy to multitask shades. So when you look at your matte shades in particular, a lot of times you can double them up as bronzers. You can double them up as eyebrow powders, or if you have some shimmery shadows, you can multitask them as highlighters. You have a lot of versatility, especially in those neutral palettes. And in your colorful palettes, you have a lot of versatility there because you can mix shades. You can blend them with your neutrals. Like I made a Franken shadow mixing my yellow eyeshadow from Kat Von D with a boring brown from Too Faced to make a really pretty mustard that I'm excited to wear in the fall. I'll talk about that when I do my Pan That Palette update coming up next, so make sure you're on the lookout for that. And also, it's all about, I used this analogy, I can't remember which palette I finished, but look at your palette, if you're painting one, as kind of a diving board. You know, when you're jumping off a diving board, you can make the choice to jump however you want, whether you want to do a dive or a cannonball or a swan dive or a pike or jackknife, whatever you want, but you're still using that same board every time you step off into the water. And so that's kind of how I treat my palette. Like I will find some way to incorporate it on a daily basis, but as I've had the experience now of panning all sorts of different shades, now I kind of tend to branch out a little bit more into the rest of my collection, and it's really helped give me a lot of variety while still keeping me consistent and finally finishing out some eyeshadow. Then that takes us into lesson number 2 that I have learned. Every single palette has its own challenges. And sometimes you'll find that you like other formulas better than others. One of the things I've learned is over the years which formulas are easier to pan. Urban Decay takes a long time because it's very, very densely packed. Lorac pans very quickly because the shadows are soft, they're very powdery, they're very buttery, so if I want consistently to move out some shadow, Lorac is the way to go. Then going into Stila Shadows, those were also pretty easy. But then I kind of met my challenge again, because when I panned the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette, some of those shades were pretty densely packed in there, and it took a very, very long time. So, you know, sometimes it's all about figuring out which formula you really like. And again, consistency is going to help you figure that out. If it's a brand that you want to continue to purchase from in the future, if it's a formula you want to continue to find more shades in. But that's one of the things, again, that goes back to that consistency. Then the second thing I've learned with challenges is each color story takes time to get used to. And again, with the consistency, that's part of the learning process of seeing what I really, really want from my eventual Holy Grail collection. And that takes time, even with neutral palettes. Like, I have learned that there are shades that I will initially love and think I'm going to gravitate towards, and by the time I finish those shades, I am over it. And then there are shades that maybe I start off the palette and they scare me, or I think, oh, that is going to be awful. And then I end up not only appreciating it, but loving it. And again, it goes back to consistency and accepting that I'm giving myself a year to be flexible in how I'm going to feel about that palette. Because like I said, every single palette will have its own challenges. The challenges that I faced with the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette were very different from what I faced with Urban Decay's Naked palette. Or this year with Kat Von D's palette with all the bright colors. It's a very different challenge than the neutral palettes I've panned in the past. So I kind of have to go in with the mindset that every palette is going to be a very different experience, a very different year, but give myself the flexibility to be able to change my preferences. And that, with time and consistency, helps me to broaden my perspective and really see the palette beyond its face value. Be able to look at a palette in the future and think, okay, that's how I'm going to multitask those shades, or that's what I'm going to do with those shades. Now when I see a large palette, I'm no longer scared, because I automatically kind of look at it and say, okay, here's kind of where I'm probably going to transition shade, and here's where I'm probably going to highlighter shade, here's where I'm probably going to crease shade, here's where I'm probably going to outer corner shade, and then I'm not as overwhelmed and I can start thinking of those color combinations from there. That in itself, the challenges with each palette, takes us into challenge or lesson number 3, and that is challenging myself to use every single shade in a palette has expanded me creatively. It's evolved my makeup application style, and it's evolved my makeup application technique, because I've had to figure things out. Again, it goes back to accepting that things will change with that consistent use of the product. It's also going to get me in each palette's challenge, giving myself the go ahead that I'm going to use every single shade helps me to learn how to embrace every single shade in the palette for what it is. Whether I'm going to like it, whether I'm going to learn to just accept it, or whether I'm going to end up being pretty bored with it by the time I'm done. But either way, like, I walk away from each palette with a very solid understanding of what I want from my future makeup collection. And part of that process for me is learning how to be comfortable with colors that I am uncomfortable with. Whether I'm just not used to seeing that shade on my face, or whether it's outside of my comfort zone. Like, I really learned how to embrace warm toned shadows this year, because that's all the rage. And I avoided them altogether for so long, because I always thought they would make my eyes look puffy and swollen and just sickly looking. But really, it's been a process of me becoming comfortable with seeing them on my skin tone, on my eyes, on my face, and really wearing them on a daily basis to learn how to love them, enjoy them, and, you know, accept that, you know, I can receive compliments when I'm wearing those kinds of shadows. It's helped me to experiment with other color combinations. When I see other palettes and things out on the market, I think about my own palette that I'm panning, and I'm curious to reach around my own collection and shop my stash and recreate something that inspires me, but use that foundational palette so I continue to move out some old eyeshadow, and that way I'm not constantly just amassing tons and tons of makeup. So it's been game-changing in that respect. Then that goes into lesson number 4. Each palette has taught me how to wear different colors to build my skill. With my Urban Decay Naked palette, the overall lesson I walked away from was learning how to wear gold and gunmetal in particular. Because Half-Baked, I was really frustrated with myself at that point in time that I had so many pans of gold eyeshadow. I didn't like gold eyeshadow. I had to learn how to wear it and be comfortable with it. Now it is something I see a place for in my collection, and I have my brands now that I really like to pull from more than others, but I had to get comfortable wearing gold in the first place. The same with gunmetal, because it was a shade that just scared the hell out of me, to be very honest. Then going into the Lorac Pro palette, that year taught me how to wear pinks and mauves, because we had light pink in that palette, there was mauve in that palette, and that was a shade that to be very honest, I'd written off before I started painting that palette because I thought it was going to be awful on my skin tone. It actually turned out to be one of my very favorite shades. Also kind of on the pink tone, red vein, I learned how to wear shades like Garnet. That was another big hurdle because I loved looking at them, but I didn't think it was a shade that I was ever going to be able to wear. So that was a big turn of events for me of just evolving my makeup and my technique style. Then going into the Stila Shadows, Stila was kind of the Goldilocks between the Urban Decay Naked palette and the Lorac Pro, because the In the Light palette was like that. You know, it wasn't too dark, but it was still very wearable with all those neutral colors. But when I started panning the Stila in the No palette, the all matte version palette, the lesson that I took away from that year was learning how to wear matte neutrals and orange in particular, because that fire shade was something I really kind of had to stretch my comfort zone out because I didn't think that orange was going to be a possibility, and it ended up being one of my absolute favorite shades with a gold. Go figure. So that was kind of a fun turn of events. Then going into the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette, the colors that I learned to wear and really appreciate and enjoy were the burgundies, Cherry Cordial and Black Forest Truffle in particular out of that palette. And both of those shades were some that really intimidated me at the initial start of that palette. That and Gilded Ganache. But Gilded Ganache was another one that I learned to really, really love. With Sumptuous Olive from MAC. So again, it takes that time, the consistency, the day in and the day out, and accepting that flexibility to be able to learn to love shades that maybe you weren't comfortable with initially. And then with Kat Von D palette this year, what I've really taken away from this entire palette is I love bright colors, but I prefer them in a matte formula. I'm all about wearing an all bright look, but I definitely love the matte formula. So that's been kind of a fun lesson to take away from that palette as well. And then finally we get to lesson number 5, and that's about my spending. I did buy quite a few colorful palettes this year, but I'm in a place at this very moment in time, especially now that I've thought out this video, I've thought about my painting journey, I've thought about painting palettes, and I've come to the conclusion that it's really taken me panning several palettes at this point to truly change my behavior and my shopping. I'm in a really good place right now with my makeup collection. I have the drive that I want to really finish a lot of things. I mean, like I said, I'm about ready to finish my Lorac Mega Pro palette. I'm going to be easily able to finish my Lorac Pro 2 if I just dedicate my time to it, along with the Kat Von D Mi Vida Loca Remix palette. And so I'm like, let's do this. Let's drive it home, move out some more makeup. It's going to make next year pretty interesting in what I decide to do with Pan That palette. But I see now for myself, and maybe this will be a similar experience for you, but it has taken me panning multiple palettes to not only truly broaden my perspective, looking at dupes across the board, because now when I see palettes, I know that no matter how much I like the shade, there is always a dupe. It may take some hunting, but there is always going to be a dupe. I hope that these tips offer you some encouragement, because Pan That palette is not an easy challenge. It takes a lot of persistence, a lot of hard work, but every single time you use that palette and move out some makeup, I promise you it's worth it, because you are going to learn so much about yourself, so much about what you want for your collection, and really evolve your makeup skills in the process, which that is beyond cool in itself. So I hope you found this helpful. I'm going to link the Get Ready With Me for this particular eye look in the card above, as well as the description box below. And I hope you stay tuned, because I will be updating on where I am with my Kat Von D Vita Look Remix palette for update number 8 of this year. So that about wraps it up for now. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you soon. See you later.